Welcome to this IAS Distinguished Lecture. It's our great pleasure to have Professor John Doyle here today to give us this presentation. John is very special. You know, it's not surprising to see people who can formulate problems. And it's more common to see people who can solve problems. But John does both. Does both brilliantly. In addition, he does sports as well. Right? Also, you got some championship, national championship, or maybe even world championship. So it's indeed a very rare occasion here to listen to John's talk. He's going to tell us, again, the title is very big. So I just, without further ado, I'll let this start.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, very, very crazy title. And I'm still, my Chinese isn't very good, so apologize if I didn't get all that quite right. This is sort of going to be a fast preview for a larger video. So what I've got is a bunch of videos on the material I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to try to go very quickly through things where there's lots of videos online, and will motivate the final part of my talk, which is about some new theoretical results that aren't yet very well developed in the videos. And it's also, for me, the most exciting theoretical work. I've been doing this for about, 42 years now. This is the most interesting thing I've ever worked on. And these are my students. So the main stuff I'm going to talk about is his work and her work, helped by him, helped by her. The reason I'm here in Hong Kong is because of the Future Network Theory Lab at Huawei. I work with them, and they fund some of this. So what I'm interested in broadly is major transitions, big changes, and these are some of them that I'm interested in. What these are is they're changes in evolution, obviously. They're changes in architecture. Often these things involve quite large changes in the structure of organisms or systems, increases in complexity, and the elaboration of networks. And then these are our heroes. Darwin and Turing are our heroes from the last 2 centuries. And then the question is, can we get a more integrated theory for these areas? And the motivating case studies I'm going to focus on today, just a few. Software-defined networking, application-driven networking, Internet of Things, cyber-physical systems, buzzword, right? Future smart grid, motivated by human brain, sensory motor control, and bacteria, and particularly microbiomes. I won't say much about that today, I don't think. I'll say a little bit about these others. Now, the mathematics that we could use for this are spread across many disciplines that are more fragmented than we would like. What we'd like to have is a more integrated theory. If we're going to get a theory of evolution and architecture, we need all of these, but we need them to integrate more together. And so that's a big objective of what we're trying to do at Caltech, trying to develop a new curriculum, but also our theory trying to develop that. And then the idea is that it gives us the theory to study these case studies, and I'll talk a little bit about this. We have time, I can do more on the sort of laws and architectures across, in this case, bacteria, internet, brains. What I mean by universal laws is that there's these trade-offs that these systems have, that they're quite universal, and we observe them, but we want to formalize them. We want to make more sense of them. I'm going to do that part fairly quickly. I've got lots more on that if you want to see more on that. And the case studies that are particularly interesting, here's just Linux OS kernel, a diagram of a sensory motor control system. We'll go through this in a little bit of detail just to say what that means. I won't have time to talk about the bacterial cell. This is in some ways my favorite example. Bacteria are very evolvable. They evolved into us, for example. I think it's kind of a joke on the planet. And so how do we attack this? Well, how do we attack universals? Well, there's two real ways to do it. My favorite, of course, is proof theorems. But today we're going to focus on the case studies. There's a rich set of case studies. So there's two ways to look at it. If you prove a mathematical theorem, then you know that it's deeply true. But then if you have a whole bunch of case studies that also tell the same story, that's another way of getting at universal properties. They're complementary. You want to do both. But I'll focus today on case studies because they're a little more accessible. But I'm hoping some of you will be interested in the math. And everything I'm going to show you is online, available. You can download it right now. It's a little hard to find. It's in Dropbox folders and stuff. You can get there from my website. But hopefully you'll be interested in looking at more of the math. So an example is as trade-offs in balance, but balance specifically as in balance. So let me give an example. We would like to be ideally both very robust and very efficient. If you compare us with chimps, we're about 4 times as efficient at distance running. Quite a significant. Running upright and all the changes, we're genetically essentially identical. Yet those small changes, upright running, make us 4 times as efficient. If you add a bicycle, you get another factor of 2. So tool use helps even more. But we're much more fragile. I won't go into all the ways, but we're weaker. In every respect, we're almost much more fragile than the chimp. We easily crash. And bikes make it worse, right? So if you're riding a bike and crash, it's worse than if you're running and you fall. We have these trade-offs. And the most important trade-off in both biology and engineering, I think, is between robustness and efficiency. So we don't want to be expensive, we don't want to be fragile, but there's a trade-off in many dimensions. An example of this in physiology is another thing that's very different about us, not just upright walking and balance, but actually our cardiovascular physiology is quite a bit changed from the chimps. And so here's a paper in PNAS on robust efficiency in the cardiovascular physiology. There's a paper, you can get that paper. There's also a series of videos that describes this in more detail. So I'm going to skip that. But it connects. One of the things we're really interested in is how do the components constraints affect the system constraint? That's the big thing we want to be doing. For a bit, we're going to try to defer worrying about efficiency and focus on robustness. Because the robustness axis alone has many dimensions to it. So we're going to look at expanding this. Now, systems have a huge number of requirements on them, generally. But you can sort of break them up into robustness in red, dimensions of robustness, dimensions of efficiency, dimensions of simplicity. So we're going to focus on robustness and 2 aspects of it. Again, ideally, you'd like to be fast and flexible. And there's a trade-off. So we want to use that as a starting point. So here's an example of something humans are really good at. We used to think we were good at things like chess and Go and poker. And it turns out actually we're not so good. Machines are a lot better. But robots can't do this. So how can humans do this? Of course, next year some robot will do this. But anyway, right now the robots can't do it. So what happens is you've got a trail here that's going back and forth, right? And then there's bumps, and you got to deal with both of them together. And we actually do that really well, right? We have higher level planning using vision, and then we have lower level reflexes that deal with the bumps. And this also illustrates tool use, right? Because we're using a sophisticated tool here. almost as an extension of our body. We learn to make that an extension of our body. How does this work? Well, we have some goal, we have some obstacles, we make a plan, and then we can execute that plan. And given time and resources, we can achieve a huge variety of goals very accurately. So tonight I'm going to fly back to Los Angeles. So given enough money and enough time, I can be exactly in my bedroom tonight. Of course I won't. I'm going to go to San Diego right away, but I could, all right, given the resources. So given advance warning, given enough resources, we can take enormous errors. I'm 10,000 kilometers from home, make it 0. That's this part of the problem. So huge, big changes in trails, and we do that very well. However, along the way, a little bump can cause a catastrophic crash. This is completely the opposite. It's delayed in the sense that you only find out about the bump after you hit it. So you can't plan for it. And you deal it with reflexes, and even small disturbances can create large errors. Yet we do these two things together quite well. That's this part of the job. There's extreme diversity here. There's extreme diversity in the nervous system that implements these different control systems. There's extreme diversity in the behavior here. Okay. So the two things our brains basically have to do are sensory motor control and maintain homeostasis. Those are the two main things our brains do. And I mentioned that we work on this part of the brain, but we're going to focus on the sensory motor control part and with things that we can actually do demos of. So one of the fun things about sensory motor control is that you can do live demos, and that gives us really nice insights into how control theory works. So what I want to talk about now is basically the architecture of intelligence. This is sort of a block diagram for, turns out, a pretty big chunk of your brain. About 95% of the neurons in your brain is in that block diagram. Now, it doesn't just do this task that we're going to talk about, but we're going to look at this in a little more detail. Okay, so we're going to do an experiment on you. So you are the experimental subject. What I want you to do is, I'm sorry it's English text, but it isn't important that you read it. It's important that you tell whether or not you could read it. Okay. So, now this is aliasing. So, okay, really easy to read that. Not too bad. Impossible. Pretty hard. Okay. So around 2 hertz, you can't see. Surprising, right? I mean, just 2 hertz. Okay. So you get a blur there. Now we're going to do another experiment. I want you to shake your head no, like this. Not big, not like this, but small and fast as you can. So the point is we want to get the highest frequency possible, right? Like that. No blur, right? So no matter how hard you shake your head, if you have normal physiology, you can't make it blur. It's more like 10 hertz. So you get no blur and blur. And really different, really, really different. Why is that? Well, it turns out you deal with object motion and head motion very differently. So this is an example of this higher level planning, the envisioning, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And this is more about reflexes. So how does this work? Okay, so there's a trade-off, right? With respect to object motion, you're really slow, but you're also very flexible and very accurate. So you can see things in the far distance very accurately. Head motion is fast but inflexible and inaccurate. We'll have to do another experiment to show the inaccuracy of the head motion system. But why is that? Well, object motion is very high bandwidth but big delay because it goes through cortex. So there's hundreds of milliseconds of delay in here. And an enormous amount of your cortex is devoted to visual processing. So most of your cortex is involved in some way or another in visual processing. Probably due to a fundamental design flaw in the way our vision works, but I'm not going to go into that. But it's really slow, but it's very flexible and very accurate. So for example, you can read this slide way from the back, and all of you are reading this slide using a visual system that was not evolved to read PowerPoint. It was evolved to do hunting. This is very different. Head motion is sensed by the ear with these fluid-filled canals. So these are basically rate gyros. Very fast. This is one of the 10 milliseconds. This is one of the fastest reflexes in your body. The same actuator, the same eye muscles are moved, but no brain, just directly, right? Very fast. But also inflexible, doesn't do anything else very well. It does just balance and sensory motor control. And also pretty accurate. So low delay, but also low bandwidth. That's a vestibular ocular reflex. So this is sort of a middle mechanism, and here's kind of a basic trade-off. So you probably didn't even know your head had that in there. So the question is, why this trade-off? What evolutionarily would make this a good solution? Well, here's the deal, is if you're doing this, hunting, the objects are in the far distance, and they're moving relatively slowly. So the angular rates of your prey are slow. But you're jumping around, so your head's moving really fast. So you need fast robustness to head motion, but you need accurate object. Okay? Accuracy, speed. That's exactly what you have here. So the implementation is extremely heterogeneous. And it's not just any top predator needs to have good distance vision and fast reflexes. Right? And the point is, I don't want to make this all sounded, but it's not just about violence. I mean, it's about other things that you could do as well. There's all these trade-offs, lots of other trade-offs that are like this. This is a summary so far. So the control theorists in the audience should, if you're a control theorist and you know any biology, you should be suspicious of this diagram, because these two signals are acting through the same actuator. They have to match. If they don't match, then when you turn your head, the system moves and it doesn't work. It has to match. And if you're a biologist, you can't encode that sort of fine-tuning genetically. So there has to be other pieces here, and there is. There's a gain in there. So it isn't one wire, it's a wire and then a little gain and then another wire. And that is done by the thing called the Vestibular Cerebellum. It's a small part of the cerebellum. And it turns out, weirdly, you have this whole separate optical system, independent of the visual system, that is used to tune this. So this whole system that just, all it looks at is the movement, bulk movement of the whole visual scene, not individual details. And that drives this and tunes this gain. And so you can put weird glasses on that distort your vision, and these are mismatched, and it makes you dizzy. And after a few hours or a day or so, you tune this up and you're fine. And then you take the glasses off and you're weird again, right? This tuning has to be there. And then as you get older and stuff like that, you have to have this constantly being tuned. This is called the vestibular nuclei, by the way. Not that that's not important. There's a trade-off again. Vision's slow but flexible, reflexes fast but inflexible. And then you got this tuning, which is hours to days. Very much slower. That's a pretty common way, very heterogeneous timescales though. Okay, so here's a weird thing. How many of you have experienced motion sickness, like on a boat, or if you try to read in a car? I don't tend to get motion sickness very easily, but I've had it like once or twice. So motion sickness is when your visual cues and your head cues don't match. And that's because there's a mismatch here. And then it's connected, this little thing is connected right to your GI tract and makes you nauseous. So this looks like a really stupid design, right? I mean, it looks like, why in the world would you wire this up to all this, your diaphragm and vomiting and sweating and larynx regurgitation? Now, muscles and balance, that makes a lot of sense, but all this other stuff makes no sense because it's just an accident of evolution that it's wired up like this so you get motion sickness. Well, maybe not, right? This is an extremely sensitive sensor for poison. So before you have any other symptoms of poisoning, you will get a little dizzy. And you will throw up right away to get rid of the poison. So this is a very sensitive poison removal system. Maybe it's not a bug. Maybe it's a feature. It's just that this didn't evolve in, say, virtual reality, right? So virtual reality, you get sick because this system doesn't work very well. Now, the new virtual reality does a better job of that, but old virtual reality would just make people sick because there was this mismatch. And evolutionarily, that mismatch meant poison, throw up, right? So now, 10,000 years from now, maybe we'll evolve to work in VR anyway. But balance is more interesting. So how do we balance? Let's look at this trade-off. We've got three systems, from the fastest to the slowest. Okay, so vision we've talked about, VOR we've talked about, proprioception is the sense of your body. So you feel so I can feel my legs, so that's really fast. So we can one at a time remove these systems and see what happens. What happens if I get rid of vision? What happens to my balance if I get rid of vision? Not a lot, right? I'll run into things, right? But I can balance okay, up to a point. Not as well, but not pretty good. How do we degrade this? Well, you can inject yourselves with anesthetics. I'm not going to do that. We're not going to do that. But you can do this. You can stand on one leg. That hurts your proprioception a bit. It also hurts your actuator a little bit. You got just one actuator to sit it to. And so now all of a sudden my balance is worse. Okay? I can still balance, but I'm not quite as good. I can hop around. I can hop around on one leg, but not as good. Okay. But what if I degrade both of them and I have to rely on the VOR alone? You can try this experiment if you want. I mean, if you want to stand up and try it, you can. Nobody's, okay. Not very much fun. Okay, so if I stand on one leg, no problem. But if I close my eyes, I fall over. Now that's because I'm old. And I had a lot of concussions when I was a kid. They didn't tell us when I was a kid that concussions were bad for you. So I had a lot of concussions. I could have been smart, right? But anyway, so, but as a consequence, and you can plot how long you can stand up, and it's perfectly correlated with age. So if you're 20 years old and you're like an athlete or a dancer, and you're healthy and all that kind of stuff, you can stand up forever, indefinitely. But then if you get old or out of shape or whatever, or overeducated, I think, is a problem too. Then you fall over. Okay. So the VOR system is inaccurate, right? If that's all I'm using, the error is accumulative. If I don't have vision, it's inaccurate. It doesn't need to be accurate, right? That's not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be fast. What if you lose the VOR system? You're hopeless. You can't do anything. So if that gets degraded, you're hopeless. We can do that experimentally as well, but not now. There's actually legal substances that you can ingest that degrade the VOR system and make you dizzy. This is a big picture. This system is distributed. It's got sparse interconnection. It's got a lot of local systems. It's got a lot of structure. It has both delays internally, but you use advanced warning externally with vision to do planning. And everything's quantized all over the place. So we need a control theory that has all those features in it. This is all unconscious and automatic. So what most people don't realize is your conscious thought runs at about 40 bits a second. That's nothing. And you can easily calculate that from how fast can you read and what's the information rate of the reading, how fast can you talk, how much can you take in speech. You can do a whole bunch of things. And it's all pretty consistent. It's all under 100 bits per second, but it's between 25 and 100 bits per second, depending what you're doing. That's nothing. So anything we're good at, we do here. And I put this as just facetious. 10 megabits per second, just the optic nerve alone. We're taking in 10 megabits per second through the optic nerve, and we're conscious of 40 bits a second. What's the rest of it doing? The rest of it's doing unconscious automatic processing, directing our attention, all sorts of things. So what can we do consciously? There's almost only one thing we can do. Decide what we will learn to do well here. Nothing you do well, you do up here. But you can train yourself to do all sorts of new things. You can do math. You can consciously decide to do math, but if you're good at math, you do it here. You can do sports here. You can be a nice person here, right? You can learn to be a sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate person. We're capable of it. Most of us don't train to do it. We train to do math and sports, but we should train to be compassionate. Okay. We want an integrated theory that deals with all of these issues in an integrated way. That's been the theoretical challenge for control theory, I would say, in sort of the world of networks. So the other thing is we need vision and VOR to be in our head. Now, it happens to be, that was convenient, right? We sort of hijacked systems that were already there. So our VOR system is a lot better than the chimps. The chimps don't need this. They're walking around on all fours. And they're not a predator. They're not a predator of the type we are, stalking predator. So we want to look at that. So what do I mean now in this context? Now we've got a case study. We've got a case study, right? One of many case studies we could do. We've got this case study. What now do I mean by law, and what do I mean by architecture? Well, by law, I mean we'd like to be fast, flexible, accurate, but we can't. So if you're building something out of biology, there's a line that you can't get past. Now, if you're doing tech, we're doing something out of technology, that line keeps shifting, right? Moore's law keeps moving that line, although it's slowing down. But if you're building out of biology, boom, there's a law. You can't go below that, right? So what a law does is tells you what you can build, either at the component level or at the system level. So what we want to build up is a bunch of laws about what we can and can't do. What is architecture? First thing about architecture is it lets you build whatever is lawful. So you can build this VOR system, you can build this vision system, all out of biology. It's pretty cool. You're building digital electronics out of chemistry. Not my first choice, but that's what was available. That's one thing about architecture. But the other thing about architecture that's more mysterious is that you can tune these systems so that they give you the illusion that you're fast and flexible, even though none of the parts are. That seems to be a contradiction. A good example of that would be, a very familiar example would be computer memory, say. There's lots of examples, but this is one. You'd like memory, here, that's fast, large, and cheap. Doesn't exist. But you can get all of these different technologies. And again, Moore's law keeps moving this. What you do is you build a virtual memory system where you stack these things up. A little bit of this, a little more of this, a little bit more, a lot of that, and you stack it up and you manage it the right way, and you virtualize it and you create a memory that looks cheap, it looks fast, and it looks really huge. Okay. That's what architecture does really well. A good architecture does. But is that a contradiction? I mean, I said, if this is a law, how can I be here? Well, this is a law for the components, but it's in also some sense a law for the system. So what's the cheat here? Well, it means that you're good at this, but you're bad at, now my hand blurs, okay? My visual system can't track my hand. Well, who cares, right? You're fragile to something you don't care about. Now, if suddenly this became evolutionarily crucial, I'm dead. Or I better evolve pretty quickly, right? So we're always having trade. Remember, there's all these other dimensions we're not looking at that are also trade-offs. But we need to be able to identify those other dimensions, right? Maybe fragile to other environments, other challenges. What we have here is we have this classics thing where we have cortex, we have reflexes, we have something I'm going to call the operating system. We don't know exactly what that is yet, but it involves the basal ganglia, the amygdala, the thalamus, the LGN, all sorts of stuff. This would be a big part of the operating system. We don't understand what that is very well yet. We know what it is here. We have applications, we have hardware, we have the OS. So if you want stuff to be fast, you better have it in hardware. The most flexibility is given by the ability to applications. You can swap applications. And then there's an OS, which is hidden. You normally don't know what it is, even, often. That holds it all together. This is really essential. It's the most hidden, most essential part of the system. Same here. Biology has the same architecture. And it has an operating system. And that we know what the operating system is. This is one of the more fascinating subjects, which is how does this all fit together? Now, these are all completely different, but the universals are really profound. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I have lots of videos on this that you can watch if you want to see more on this. Because again, I want to get to the coolest theorem in 42 years. I don't want to miss that. Okay. But this motivates what the theory we've been doing. This is why I've been working on it, these case studies. And this is about control. So we don't necessarily think about operating systems in terms of control, but it is a control system. And one of the reasons there's no theory of operating system is because we've been thinking of it in terms of computer science. And it isn't a computer science problem, it's a control problem, or an integration of computer science and control. So the universals here are really profound. There's these trade-offs, and the dominant trade-off is speed versus flexibility. That's the big one. Massive evolvability enabled by this thing called hourglass diversity. What do I mean by hourglass diversity? Here's an example. On our cell phones and our laptops in this room, how many different apps are there? Thousands, right? Now, a lot of them are in common. I guess everybody here uses WeChat, right? I don't know. That in Shenzhen. I don't know. Anyway, but you use email, you use, I don't know, lots of the same things. How many different hardware systems are there in this room? Tens. How many operating systems? 2. Mine and then whatever y'all else you're using. Anyway, I'm using Windows 10. How many people have Windows 10 on their laptop? Anybody? 2 people. How many have Apple iOS? Okay, that's 2. Basically, Apple iOS is Linux, and so it's either Linux or Windows. And Windows is turning into Linux too, so everything's turning into Linux. So it will be 1, right? So enormous diversity, no diversity. Okay, but that's universal. How many genes are there on the planet? Just how many genes are in the bacterial biosphere? Who knows? Infinite. How many proteins? Infinite. How many transcription and translation protocols are there? 10 to the 32 cells on the planet. There's 1. And how do you evolve in these systems? Now, the old story of Darwinian evolution is you make little changes. That's not how you evolve. How do you mostly evolve your computer? By writing code? No, we all write code. Mostly we grab code from somebody else. You swap code. How do bacteria evolve? They swap genes. Nobody ever makes a new gene, maybe a billion years ago. Now you grab one and modify it a little bit. How many of us actually have ideas? Hardly anybody, right? How many of us actually make our own tools? Nobody, right? We don't make our own bicycles. Somebody teaches us to ride a bike, and then somebody gives us a bike, right? We don't hardly do anything original. So, but that's true of bacteria. That's true of everything, right? So horizontal transfer is the mechanism that we have evolvability. These architectures all create the illusion of speed and flex. They look fast and flexible, right? Even though none of the hardware is. And I haven't talked much about this, but the idea is that the most crucial part of this is the operating system, but it virtualizes everything so you don't see it. The most dangerous thing, again, we could talk about this endlessly, is you hijack this. If you can swap genes easily, viruses can swap those genes, their own genes, and hijack this system. Interesting, everything's digital at the top. No, the world is analog somewhere down there, but all these systems are ultimately digital. And robustness is the big issue in all of this. Like I said, speed, flexibility is the robustness trade-off in these control systems. These are quite profound. And like I said, I have videos that really go through this in a lot more detail. So, how are we doing on time? Ooh, okay. I gotta speed up here. All these things are new wastes. This is what I call the waste of an hourglass. Electricity, plumbing, engines, all these things. But all these are too. Google, Facebook, Amazon, all these are new wastes. We could spend a lot of time on that. But here's again an example, the operating system. Then you put WeChat on top of it, right? And then this doesn't matter. So the problem with that is, if you're Apple, you put a lot of trouble into giving this integrated feel of the iPhone, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's using iChat. You don't care. Running on anything. Really imperils. Whenever you create a new waste, you make everything else into a commodity. This is a starting point for the theory. I'm just going to say something about this, which is we want a theory of this that includes specific models on spiking neurons. So you take into account spiking neurons, and then what you do is you take the spiking neuron model and you can get these behaviors out of it that you want rigorously. So that's really cool. That's not what I'm going to talk about. We need a sensor that's fast and high. Why do we need that? So we've done this. We can't move our eyes and VOR system around. So we have to replace it with another system. So we're going to balance a stick instead. Okay? And the stick balancing is harder if I make it shorter. It's harder, harder, harder still. Eventually it's so short I can't do it at all, okay? Why is that? It's getting more unstable. It's really stable here. I can look away. I mean, if it's up here, right, it's really slow falling over. So I can have a big delay. You know, I can look away and come back. I can walk around. I can do all sorts of things, and it's okay. When it gets shorter, my delay kills me. You know, that 200 milliseconds delay in the visual system, hopeless. So if you know any control theory, you know unstable and delay, problem. This is the more interesting case. If I take it this long, so I could show you all the theory that predicts this, but I'm going to skip it. Videos, lots of videos online on this thing. It's a really good way to teach control theory. Okay? So now this is easy. So if I make it longer, it should be even easier, right? More stable. Of course it is. But if I look at the same point, well, if I had more time, I would say I'd look at the same point and actually it doesn't make any difference. But I'm using peripheral vision. That's cheating. I have to get rid of the peripheral vision. So this is hopeless. This is much harder than this. Why is that? Well, there's a bunch of theory you can do on this. And you can plot, as a function of length, Either you shorten it or you keep the length the same and you look down much harder. This is the Bode's integral formula. Okay? If you had Bode's integral formula, this totally explains it. There's a problem with this, though. At this point, if you're all biologists, you go, oh, wait a second. We're talking about balance, all this stuff. Why do I need to know, analytic function theory and do contour integrals and all this stuff? Like, why do I need to do that? And you go, because that's really easy. And they go, no, it isn't. If you got a PhD in math, okay. So this is too complicated math for the biologist. And it's not their fault, right? They got to. You know how much biology there is to learn? You don't want to have to learn this. And also, why do we talk about the frequency domain, right? Now, this is me talking, right? I've been loving the frequency domain again for more than 40 years, but this is not the way to go. Anyway, this is an unstable zero. So if you want to teach unstable zeros, this is the way to teach it. And you can even explain what a zero is. Because what a zero is the dynamics if you pin the point you're looking at. So one of the reasons this is bad is you get an unstable zero. Anyway, you can do all sorts of cool stuff with that. I'm not going to do that. There's all this theory for this. But there are also oscillations. Why are there oscillations? Notice that at the bottom I start oscillating, right? Why? Those are all over the place. And they're all over in biology. And the point is, this is easy. This is conservation of energy. Okay. But the up thing is totally different. It's conservation of fragility, right? It's that Bode's integral. It's this. It's this integral. Again, but nobody understands that, right? So we wrote this paper, glycolytic oscillations, a big mystery in biology. And it's just exactly that. We published it in a good place, Science, good place, right? Nobody understands this paper. Because either they don't know what this means, or they don't know what this means. So the audience for this is like those three people. Anyway, so one of the things I've been working on, which I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so this is all this. Okay, so. Okay. Anyway, so just let me say one thing. So now I figured out a time domain version of this. Purely in the time domain, high school algebra. You can teach this to anybody. And we could have done this 40 years ago, but we were so obsessed with, we love this math, right? I love this math, right? H infinity, right? Love this stuff. But they don't love it, right? The biologists don't, right? So you have to just say, okay. And the question is, can you make it simpler? That's the question we got to keep asking ourselves. Can we make it simpler? And yes, you can. So I'm not going to talk about that either. Again, I've got some cool videos online that show you why it oscillates. Because I want to get to the actually coolest thing of all. Okay. It's all about robust efficiency again. It all boils down to robust efficiency. But you can read this paper. Please do. I don't care if you read it. Cite the paper. Nobody's citing this paper, right? Anyway, I'm saying, okay. So we need a theory that connects all these things, okay? Lots of videos on this. Okay. Now I'm going to talk. This is my Huawei part of the talk. Okay. So a case study would be designing a wide area network, what we'll call the reflex layer for a wide area network. So this is just simulation, but we'll show you some real data later. So here's the idea: you got some physical network. What does old control theory let us do? We have to have a centralized controller, and there can't be any internal delays in the controller, right? The controller has to be everything, right? That's not the system we want. That's what we want. This is how the internet actually works, and this is how future smart grid works. This is how our nervous system works. All these systems work like this. So it's distributed, sparse and local. There's delays internally. There's some advanced warning about the environment and the world, but internally delays. Everything's quantized, okay? And you want to do sense, communicate, compute, control, and actuate. What happened? Sorry. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so this is the unconscious reflex part, right? Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to do the simplest thing possible. We're going to do an LQG problem on the internet, okay? So the idea is that you're going to have some nominal traffic, and then you're going to add some noisy traffic on top of it. Simplest thing possible. Does this make sense as a model of the internet? Not so much. I'll critique that later. But it's an easy thing to explain as a control theory story. So what are the issues? What you'd like to do is control the rate so they keep going through, but you also want to keep the Qs small, because that's delay. The trade-off there. So here's one controller. This we call GODF, globally optimal delay free. It means you have a centralized controller, no delays at all, perfection, right? You can't build this, but you can simulate it. So this is just simulation. So we can simulate this. Can't build it. This is a centralized controller you can build in the sense that you have a centralized controller, but it has to respect the delays of the network. That you can build. And you can design it. So you can design this with standard control theory. You can design this with standard control theory. So this is just standard LQG. Because the controller is in one place. This is what we want to do. This is coordinated. So you have different controllers, and they're allowed to coordinate, right? And then you can be, and that works. So that's the new theory. The new theory is that we can do that. Not so new, but kind of new. And then you can do this, which is completely myopic, and that's a hard problem. But we can sort of approximate it. Here's the answer, right? So what I've got here is I've got the average Q length and the average and the packet loss. And I vary this lambda, how much I penalize Q length. So I'm just penalizing different things. And you sweep out this trade-off curve. So green is God, black is our guy, and these are the two lousy ones. And it's not a huge difference, but you get kind of a sweet spot here. This is where you maybe like to operate things. And the point is, there's a very small gap between our implementable controller that's distributed and God. And there's a much bigger gap between this and the centralized or the myopic. Now, how would this be more interesting? We don't really care about the average behavior. We would care about kind of tail latency, so worst case latency. So we shouldn't do average case, and that would be more interesting. But that's not the problem with this. I'll try to get the problem. And then Kevin Tang implemented this is a physical network. Same story. It doesn't really change a lot. Not dramatic, but a bit of an improvement. I'm going to come back and tell you what was wrong with that in a second by shifting to another example, power grid. Okay? What we're going to do here is we're going to take, this is a topology. We can make this as big as we want. And it's just basically, it's not a perfect mesh. It's nearly a mesh, but we take some stuff out just so there's some non-uniformity in the system. And then in each node, you just put an oscillator. So this is just really, honestly, it's a coupled oscillator system. It's kind of a toy model for what the power grid does. And so again, you can have this dense centralized controller, or you can have what we really want, which is this. We'd like to have all these features, and we can do this now, right? We can design that. Here's the problem. This is the number of states. We're going to go up to 50,000 states. This is how long it takes to compute the controller on a laptop. It doesn't matter what this is just the scaling. So this is log, so this is n cubed. N cubed is how expensive it is to design a centralized LQG controller. That's what the distributed one costs. It's constrained, right? It's a much harder problem. So if we want to design optimal controllers with this distributed stuff, and if you kept up on this, this is quadratic invariance, we're doing all this fancy stuff that's been done in the last, say, 10 years. Not so good. Not scalable, right? That's the state of the art. We can't implement that, and we can't scale that. So that's bad news. But this is the structure of the controller we want. So the question is, can we compute it more cheaply? The answer is, and they have basically the same performance. So we don't want to lose performance here, right? We want to do as well. Remember, we saw that the performance was essentially the same. Same here. This God controller we can't implement and this distributed controller are nearly the same performance. Just completely intractable. Well, here's what we can do, what we want to get to. Order 1 scalability with no loss in performance. This is the punchline. This is the coolest thing I've ever worked on. The fact that we can do this. So I want to try to sketch out what's involved there. We call it system level synthesis. And it's a completely different way of thinking about control design. And I still don't understand it, but I'll tell you what I know. Now, what am I talking about here? What's the difference here? This is, if I run it on one laptop, I can go out to 50,000 on one laptop, but it takes a while. But any of these systems, they're all localized, or they're all distributed. So you've got a computer everywhere you're going to implement the controller. You just do it like this, and in parallel, it's order 1. So you design and implement like this. So you could just go, there's really no limit to how big a system you could do. Okay, this was from this conference I was at. This guy, Bill Daly, who's a very famous chip designer from Stanford, he says, locality is everything. Local is efficient, but also local is robust. Okay, so I want to explain this. So now we can scalably do all these things. We could sort of do them before, a couple years ago, but now we can do them all scalably with this. So how does this work? And it's what we want for all these things. The big problem is communication. What makes this problem hard? Communication is sparse and delayed. And if you know about Witzenhausen and all that kind of stuff, that's bad news. But what we're going to do is we're going to overcome this and do local computation and control. And I have to explain to you what I mean by local. So here's scalability. So I'm going to work through a completely trivial example, but one that we can easily visualize. So here's a trivial picture. We're not going to do something like this. We will later. We've got controllers, physical plants, and each wire is a connection that has a delay in it. And unless I say otherwise, each one of these is delay 1, right? So here's what happens is you get a state deviation at time 1. It propagates, it propagates, it propagates. So as time goes to infinity, it's just going to go off to infinity, okay? And we're going to usually have neutrally stable systems, so they just go on to infinity. Now we're going to set up a computer net. This is a computer network. This is communication. So it's sparse. You're just communicating to your neighbor. But it's fast. This is twice as fast as these are. Okay? So now what happens? Boom. Next step. Boom. But now you know about it. You know there's a disturbance. Next step. This is propagated once. This is propagated twice. Right? Next step. You're out ahead of it. Now, if these are coordinated, they can kill it, right? Boom. So it's FIR, localized in time and space, okay? But you got to be fast to do this. And it doesn't matter if it goes off to infinity. The point is you're localized, so maybe this isn't obvious, but the idea is that now I can do the design and the implementation of this control system. And these controllers only need to know about their little patch. They don't have to worry about what's over here. That's the basic idea. Everything else is just formalizing this mathematically. Let's take a look at a little bit more, this in a little more detail. So what are the trade-offs now? It's all about trade-offs again. So here's a case where same sort of situation, no control. This is time. This is space. So I hit it here, and here's the propagation in time. That picture makes sense? Just a little slower. This is what it looks like. So time is moving here, time. And at each time instant, it's spreading out. So it's like I'm dumping water on the floor and it's spreading out. Or I'm dumping packets into the internet and they're spreading out. It's kind of neutrally stable. So if we go on for a long time, it doesn't dissipate. It just kind of stays. So first again, God, what does God do? This is what God does. Here's a space-time for this. This is exponential decay, no constraints. This is just an exponential decay. In time and in space. This is the controller, and this is the globally LQ optimal. Let's look at them together, right? So the controller is instantly, right? Disturbance instantly, and then things get, so this is the best you can do if you have no delays, no other constraints whatsoever, just LQG optimal. Now what we're going to do is we're going to call this system, this thing, so it's just a convolution kernel, right? This is just the closed loop. We're going to call that phi2.1, and we're going to call that closed loop phi1.1. So the disturbance to x and the disturbance to u, that's going to be our main object. That's what we're trying to design, right? We want this to be small, right? This is the closed loop system. We want it to be small. That's what we're going to, okay? I'm not doing anything. I'm just defining something to be the closed loop. So here's the big idea. And we're going to do state feedback. We can do output feedback, but the formulas are a little more complicated. State feedback. The question is, if I pick one of these things, is it realizable? What I mean by that is, I want to just pick this. I want it to be anything. Because I want it to be localized, I want it to be delayed, I want it to have all these features. That's the thing I want to control. I want to design that. Oh, but I have to have a controller that implements it, which is a pesky detail, right? The question is there a controller that makes this thing? Well, it's an algebraic condition. That's it. It's an affine condition. It basically looks like stabilizability. But the nice thing is, that's an affine condition. Everything else I want to do is convex in these variables. So I can now put convex constraints on sparsity, delay, everything I want. And then I just check this simple condition, whether or not I can get a controller that does that. Or I can just put all these constraints in and let Steve Boyd give me an optimization, an optimal controller. Now I can't solve Riccati equations anymore, but it's convex optimizations, no problem. And it's going to be localized, so it's really cheap and really small. Now I can design everything I ever wanted, just about. And then what do? The construction of the controller is trivial. I just go back, I take these things, this is not causal, but this is a causal representation of the controller. And the controller explicitly has these closed loop pieces in it. So it's this extreme version of internal model. Its internal model of the closed loop system is in the controller. But if this is all local, the controller is all local. I'm not going to spend time to justify that. You sort of have to trust me on that. That's it. That's the big theorem. Have to go? Okay, sorry. Thanks for coming. Okay, I'm going to keep going a little bit. Okay, so again, this guy, that's a centralized controller. This is a localized controller. All we did was say, I don't like this. I'm going to just say convex constraint. Boom, boom. I'm allowing this to be optimized, but this shape is just a convex constraint. I want it to be 0. That's a convex constraint. This one happens to be realizable. That's it. Now, you can't tell, but the performance is just as good. The 2 norm is just as good. But now it's localized. It's also sparse actuation. I don't want to actuate every point. I'm actuating every other. Let's zoom in on that and see what's going on, right? The errors are nearly optimal. It's localized in design and implementation. Again, that's not obvious, but you can kind of imagine that it's true. That when I design, I only have to have a little patch of the system. Then when I implement it, I only need a little patch of the model to implement it. So very cheap. The communications are sparse and delayed, right? You're only talking to your neighbor, whatever sparsity pattern you want to put in. And it's delayed, right? It's not instantaneous. It's delayed. That's just another convex constraint. I still don't believe this, kind of. That's so easy. Here, dense. and instantaneous, which we can't build. So amazingly, it's cheap. It's, you know, it is better, cheaper, faster. I mean, it's cheaper to design, and it has all these extra features. So the point is, design the closed loop, not the controller. All these constraints that are convex here, if you look at them in controller space, they're a nightmare. And we've been trying to, I've spent 42 years trying to figure out how to design controllers. I was just doing the wrong thing. Design systems under the constraint that you can build them. And we can probably do a lot of other things other than control design with this. But we'll see. Okay. So let's play around. Now we've got this hammer. Let's play around with it, right? So let's zoom in on this. So let me just remind you, what am I doing here? I'm putting these kind of constraints on the system, right? I'm saying it has to be, I'm putting constraints on where this can live. And so constraints that are convex here are a mess in K, but I can put all the things. And so, of course, I'm putting constraints on time and space. And ideally, you'd like your controller to be faster than your state, right? That's just, again, that's the condition. So what happens? We can now trade things off. Here is fast comms, 5 times faster than the plant. Let's go all the way down to 1.5. This is slower. It's worse. Red is bad. So this is worse. It better be worse, right? I mean, if I'm putting that kind of extra constraint in, it better. But now we can do that trade-off. I can systematically do that trade-off scalably. I can zoom out again. I can slow down even more. It's still all localized, but not as local. And it's slower and wider. Worse performance degrading. Zoom out more. Now I'm going to do something sparser, right? Actuate less densely. And it gets worse, right? To better, right? But now we can systematically explore these trade-offs. Now I'm going to go really extreme. My communication is the same speed as the plant. I can't get out ahead anymore. No problem. The machinery still works. You can't localize anymore. But you can still, the design is still done locally. The implementation is local, but the state is not local. So the thing that is always local is the design and the implementation, but only under certain conditions, which is comms fast. If the comms are fast, then everything is local. The comms is too slow, you can't stop it, it's going to leak, but you can control the leak. So now you get sort of exponential kinds of decays out here. You no longer get this sharp FIR. So you lose the FIR. The point is, in all these cases, we're always designing for these little boxes, just as stuff leaks. Here's what happens is, we design for that box, that's really great. So what's this picture? This is log amplification as a function of state. So imagine in that heat map, we're taking each row and taking its norm. So the really good guy cuts off, right? That's this one. Well, this is a little slower. A little slower. Doesn't quite as localized. But now what happens? You have really slow comms. The point is, this is what happens. You're always, but the point is, if these are well coordinated, they're still doing a good job of control. It's just that there's a leak, but the leak is not driven by as much as it was before. So here's an example, comm speed 1. You're designing for this patch, implementing in that patch, so very localized, but you can't stop it from propagating outside the patch. So it's not it's slower, it's not localized. But it's still okay, right? You're not doing badly. You've got this tail, you got this exponent. This is linear logs. This is just an exponential tail that you can't get rid of. But still up here, you're doing pretty well. When my students showed me this, I didn't believe it. That come on, it can't just work, right? And they go, no, it just works. I said, okay, but what happens if you take the comms down to half, right? It can't possibly work. We'll say, well, it'll work, but it'll work bad. I go, no, it won't work at all. The software will break, right? Something will go wrong. No, comm's a half. Now it's worse, and it's got to be worse, right? You're really slowly communicating, but it's still doing okay, and it's still optimal in a certain sense. I say, okay, let's just make sure that we're not doing science fiction here. If you set the comms to 0, it won't work, right? They go, no, it works, not very well. This is pure decentralized control. No communication at all. You're still designing locally. It's leaking, but remember before it just kept going, right? It's still giving you exponential decay out here. It's not very good. This is the best you can do if you have no communication at all. This is about as well as you can do. Out here. But now you can really play this trade-off game with communication, communication sparsity, everything about it, you can now trade off. So I never thought this would be possible. I mean, I thought it would be possible to work down in this thing, but to be able to have this kind of trade-off just didn't seem, everything we knew about distributed control said this wasn't possible. Witzenhausen, all the stuff Sanjay Lal's worked on, Rodkowitz, everything we've done suggested this wasn't possible. So now we can go back and look at these guys, right? So this opens up everything. I don't even yet appreciate all the things you can do, but let me give you an example of something you can do. Again, let's go back to this guy. We got this centralized controller. So here's the question: where do you put the sensors and actuators? Okay. So we want to know, where do we put these? And where do you put the communication links, right? Now, if you know anything about, this is a combinatorial nightmare, right? This is an NP-hard problem because you have every possible combination. You got to check them all. So two things. You can do L1 kind of regularizations. You can do atomic norm regularizations. The other thing is, you're just designing patches, right? I just looked at this little patch, and I enumerate every possible case. And I get the optimal thing in this patch. Because my thing is pretty close to optimal anyway, that's going to be a really good design. This completely breaks the scalability issues of a whole bunch of problems. How is this going to work? See, we're going to have all of our computation down here. Okay. Now, on top of that, you could have something that's exponential in your patch. But the number of patches, it's order 1. So there's two ways to think about it. How complex is the computation in the patch? Controller design is n cubed in the patch. Placement is exponential in the patch. But if the patch is small, so what? As long as you have an order 1 scalability in the size of the system. So now you can do, imagine all the compute things you can do in patches. You can do nonlinear control with saturation in patches. All sorts of stuff that doesn't scale well at all, you can now do. I think, I don't know. I don't know what the limits of this are. And this is all just, what are the order 1, all this kind of stuff anyway. So here's what happened. Here's the open loop system. So this is why I did everything in 1D to get you the idea, because if I draw these pictures, I have to do movies and I can't do these heat maps, right? That's terrible. So what happens if we put actuators everywhere? Good, localized. Now the point is, I don't think you can design this system except localized. So you can't actually, this is too big to even run this GODF controller. I think, I'm not sure, but 800 actuators is probably okay. We can probably do this. In any case, everything I'm going to show you here, all the computations were done localized. Okay, so now we're going to put in 261 actuators. This essentially is good, but sparse. This was done using atomic norm regularization. To show off that you could do it, right? But you could have done, because it's localized, you could have done exponentially bad exhaustive search on patches. Gives you the same answers, so as far as we can tell. Okay, this is you turn the thing around and put the 261 in bad places, okay? Horrible. Of course, that's not surprising. So you can deliberately do bad designs as well as deliberately do good designs. So you can put the actuators in the worst places. That would just be putting them along the edges, I think. Okay, so here's the trade-off picture. You've got actuators, error, right? And of course, you're really good, best performance here. But it's kind of a sweet spot, right? Slightly worse, spreads out a little more, but the norm is about the same. The norm is practically the same. Here's just random, and then here's bad, and here's open loop. Of course, ideally you'd be here. You'd have no actuators and perfect performance. This isn't bad, and you might be able to push it further. We didn't explore pushing it further into this corner. We don't really know this is all numerical, so we don't have a clear picture of what the fundamental limits are. But there's a law here. We don't understand it exactly. So in principle, you have this combinatorial design space of 2 to the number of things you're designing. So in this case, it would be 2 to the 800. 2 to the 800 is hopeless, right? But it's no problem. And it's a mix of localization plus convex relaxations. Okay, let's go back to this is just, go back to the internet. Same story, same problem again. And here's just the same issue, which is you've got 42 controllable buffers in this system. And you can either put a controller there or just a FIFO, a brainless Q. And now you can do the same stuff, right? Again, horrible, 10 to the 12th combinations of possibilities. Theory, experiment, not experiment, simulation. But here's the story is, get this sweet spot. Here's everywhere. Here's just on the edges, which you're going to do anyway. You just add 4 more actuators and you get a pretty nice little bump down here in the performance. So it's certainly worth doing this. And then there's no additional benefit. Very hard to make sense of this if you don't have this framework, but it's quite straightforward. Again, we don't think LQG is the right way to think about this. It's just an easy way to explain it. But you're all doing this down here. And we can put so now we've got all these issues that we couldn't deal with before, and we can do them scalably. If you know about quadratic invariance, most of the stuff I talked about is not quadratic invariance, so there's no other way to do these designs, even if you have infinite amount of computing. And so it's scalable sort of thing. Okay, so let me tell you what else there is. You can go look at these videos. One is tons of stuff on this story. So this story I went through very quickly to motivate the theory I talked about. But this is a fascinating story. Also, I got a lot about on zombies. Zombies are really interesting. I'm not particularly interested in zombies, but there's this thing called zombie viruses, zombie parasites. They are amazing. It's one of the most interesting subjects I've ever studied. And then there's, I've also got, you can go online and see why these oscillations. With high school algebra, no frequency domain. Now most of you are perfectly happy with a frequency domain, so this is meaning to you, but we got to think about how to explain this stuff more easily. Okay, so anyway, I'll stop. This is, again, this is the big result was his thesis. Was really supervised by another graduate student, so I was cheerleading and trying to understand what the hell's going on. And I kept saying, this can't be right, this can't be right, this can't be right, the whole way through. This can't be true, right? She did the neuroscience stuff that I didn't talk about. She did the balancing stuff, which I didn't really talk about. And then he's a postdoc who did his PhD at Oxford with Antonis Papakristodolou, who was my student, so he's an academic grandchild, and he's now at Caltech. And so he's left and gone to work for GE. These two guys are now pushing this theory more forward. So, and again, the reason I'm here in Hong Kong is these people, and they funded some of this. So anyway, so go look at this stuff, right? I mean, and give me feedback, right? And so bottom line, what I just showed you, I think, is a completely new way to teach control theory in two respects. Examples that motivate it so that people care about it, right? This stuff, all the stuff that we can do that connects us with the biologist and the neuroscientist and stuff like that. And everybody's interested in how their brain works. Doesn't matter, you don't have to be a neuroscientist, everybody cares how their brain works. So it really is fun to have those systems. And then, once you've motivated, these kinds of distributed, delayed, quantized system problems, then we have this whole new theory, and it's simpler. It's simpler than what we've been doing. And at Caltech, if you're taking a course in convex optimization and a course in operator theory in parallel, which we do, then you can cram all this in 1 quarter, because you're going to just turn everything into convex optimization problems, and you're going to turn everything into, everything's going to be posed as operator theory and convex optimization. And so the amount you have to actually do to do control theory is like this little tiny thing now, potentially. It really does simplify things. Then the other thing is, I spent Monday afternoon at DJI doing amazing stuff with the drones. And those things now are also, again, the cool thing about the drones is all the stuff you do, sensory motor control, balancing, all this kind of stuff, you can then do with the drone. And the gimbals and the vision, and they have to have this VOR system. They have to have a fast gimbal system because they have to be able to make vision track. So they have all the same issues in the drones that we have. So you see these universal issues. It's really cool, really fun. So I'm hoping to work with them in developing a curriculum around brains and drones. And then, of course, you want to connect up with AI and machine learning. That's a whole other direction that we're working on. So it's a really potentially exciting time for controls. And for me, it's weird that now I'm old and feeble and running out of steam and stuff. And I think this is the most fun I've ever worked on. It's like the 80s. The 80s were amazing. But this is more exciting, and we're having more different applications and stuff. So I'm hoping to interest you all in thinking about things from this perspective, maybe teaching things this way. And I'm eager to help do that. So, okay, questions? I know that was an awful lot of material, awfully fast, and superficial kind of. Yeah?
You mentioned the OS was like the not diverse part of it. Do you also mean the control law is the not diverse that's universal across it?
So, no. I conjecture that. What I can say for sure is there aren't many OSs. And there aren't many OSs in all the 3 systems I looked at. So whatever the OS is in our brain, it's the thing we have most in common. The ideas we have are really different. We all have different ideas. We all have different hardware, all have different toys. We drive different cars, we have different everything. But the thing we have most in common is how our basal ganglia and amygdala and cerebellum work, right? Those are very conserved. And again, we talked about the operating systems we have are all the same. The transcription translation protocols that we're running and our bacteria are running, identical. Those aren't just, there's just one. Okay? Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that lets you give plug and play apps and hardware, right? All you have to worry about is the operating system, you don't have to worry about the hardware. And the hardware doesn't have to worry about the applications, it just has to worry about the operating system. Then you can get this diversity on both ends, and you don't have to worry about cross-layer compatibility. So that's why that's there. Now, we need a control theory of operating systems. There is no theory of operating systems. They just happen. We're in the process now of having the opportunity to design them for the next generation internet. And it's a control problem because you want to manage where all the bottlenecks are, whether it's in a data center or in the wide area network. But there's a lot of aspects of that problem that control theory's never thought about. Like everything up here has names, everything down here has addresses. Name, address, resolution. That looks like a classical CS problem, but it's probably a control problem. So the control theory for the OS is still a baby. So one of the first things to do is what I just showed you, because the lower levels of any control system that's going to be an OS control system has got to be localized, because the hardware is really sparse. The hardware is sparsely connected, with delays everywhere. You don't want to globally control that. You want to be able to control it locally. Like I'm standing up here. Everything that isn't conscious that I'm doing, all the automatic stuff is localized, distributed by the grip of these two things, independent of each other. Now, if I have to do that, they have to coordinate, but that's a higher layer. So I don't know what that control theory is going to look like yet. But I think we need, I'm hoping that a single control theory will address all of these different challenges. That what an OS has to do in all these different cases is extremely different, but there's enough in common from a control theory point of view that we can develop a theory for it. But so far, we don't have a lot. We got this. We got this layering as optimization story, but that's static. So there's a static picture that really thinks about layering in a systematic way. And there's this dynamic picture that really gets the biggest challenge, which is this reflex layer, distributed, localized. Next step is we've got to put this, and Nikolai's already started doing, so Nikolai, this guy. He's already started working on layering plus distributed. But a lot of ways to go. This is all new. Question. Any other questions? Does that make any sense? Yeah.
Well, you said that the control design was the wrong thing you did in the past 40 years. I think many people were influenced by you.
Yeah, I got to try to.
I did the wrong thing as well. So.
Yeah, I apologize. No, but the problem. Okay, here's what happened was, when I was learning control theory in the 70s, it was LQG designing controllers, right? So at least we got over that LQG was the only thing to do. And we started thinking, oh, maybe we shouldn't design K, we'll design the loop shape, right? So we had a whole thing about loop shaping. So design not K, design L. Then we had this, oh, don't design K, design Q, right? So we keep, in some ways we were inching towards designing the system, right? We designed, okay, don't design the controller. The controller's a mess, but the loop shape, oh, that's really nice. And then we can get back out the controller. The next thing was, oh, but it's convex in the Euler parameter. So design the Euler parameter, and then you can back out the controller, right? The problem is we stopped there, right? So if we just kept going, right, let's just keep, taking more and more convex, bigger things that we're looking at, we would have come up to this, right? But it took us 30, 40 years from Euler to this. It's embarrassing.
Implementability, complex constraints. If you want to say, you design the system or you design the performances.
Well, what was interesting, I mean, again, it's trivial in retrospect, but the idea that all this localizability, all this scalability stuff is all convex in the closed loop system. Just here's what I thought. I'm trying to rationalize how stupid I am. But it was, if I design the closed loop, there's just no way I can easily constrain that to be realizable, right? And that was the thing I was telling my students. I said, we'd like to design the closed loop, because we knew that everything was convex there, right? But the idea was, how do you reconstruct the controller? And then they show me this theorem, and I go, that's it? And then I said, that can't be that simple. And then they show me the proof. It's like this. And so I keep thinking, something's wrong, right? It couldn't be that simple. And it was that simple. It's a shock. I don't know how we missed. And here's what's going to happen is we're going to find out that some Russian did this in 1954, right? Because that's the thing that always happens, right? Somebody, you give a talk and then somebody in the back goes, in Russian literature, this was done in 17th century, you know? And you go, oh yeah, right. And then you go check, and there's like, you know, in 17th century, some Russian did it, okay? And it wouldn't be quite this anyway, so. So I don't know, we'll have to find that out. It's too simple. It's too simple not to have been thought of before. But the nice thing about it is this is gonna make teaching control to a broader audience much simpler. So if people know, you know, the modern CS person is gonna learn convex optimization, a little bit of networking. You can teach this stuff to them, I think, much quicker. We'll see. Question back here? Yeah. There's a lot of details I didn't even mention. I'm sorry.
So there's this idea that localized computation works more efficiently and better than the centralized or the distributed one. So was there a study on the size of the patch that should work together as a...
Yes, I didn't talk about that. That's a trade-off. That's another dimension of the trade-off. If they make the patch too small, then your performance is so bad that you don't care, right? It's just, no. It'd be basically open loop, right? So what you need to do is make the patch big enough. And so one of the trade-offs would be freeze everything, communication speed and everything, and then you can expand the state. What happens is you get an exponential decay. So you get exponentially better as you increase the size of the patch. So it's really very favorable. So you get an exponential win in how big you have to make the patch, or so it seems. The point is every case is going to be maybe different, who knows. But the point is so here's the things you have to trade off. You trade off where you put the actuators, where you put the sensors. We have state feedback, so we didn't have that. But where you put the sensors. Where do you put your computers? Where do you put the communication links between all of those things? How fast do you make them? How big do you make a patch? Those are all things that you'd have to trade off. But the idea is, some of those are NP-hard, horrible things. But if they're hard in the patch and not hard in the size of the system, then not so hard. And you can still do regularization stuff. Regularization sometimes works and it doesn't. The place where L1 regularization works for sparsity is where you're designing the system to be well-conditioned. And what I found out is this, because I've been dabbling in machine learning, it turns out most of the advertised rate algorithms don't actually work on real data that you care about because the real data is ill-conditioned. But when you design a system, you can make it well-conditioned, and then these regularization techniques seem to work better. We're just scratching the surface, though. But the patch is a designed feature, right? It's something you have to choose. So if you make the patch bigger, it's more expensive, but the performance is better. There's a sweet spot. You want to get it big enough that you're negligibly different from making it everything. But it's exponentially better as you make it. So pretty quickly, it's close to infinite. But you want to stop at a point where you get the benefits of the locality. And the benefits are design with the patch, implement with the patch, right? That's a good question. Any other?
Well, let's thanks John again.